saw they did a poll this week, and Obama was defeating our presumptive nominee by 7 points or something like that. But you read the poll, which they buried, they polled 8% more Democrats than they did Republicans. And they justified that on the basis Obama won Virginia by 8 points last time. And of their 1,300 people that they polled, 300 of them aren't registered to vote. So only the Washington Post could do a poll like that and then say he's going to win Virginia big. But I think the key thing in this campaign, there's enthusiasm all over Virginia. Traveling all over the state, there's enthusiasm. And it's going to be probably the nastiest campaign we've ever had in our lifetime, because he doesn't have anything positive he can talk about other than getting bin Laden. And if we get more into that, it wasn't him that got bin Laden, it was the SEALs that got it. And but that's the only thing he can talk about. So when you don't have anything positive to talk about, you can demean religion, you can demean Tea Party, you can demean conservatives, you can demean anybody you want to. And I think the thing that they just did, the lady at the in his campaign, that took a shot at working women as opposed to stay-at-home moms, I really believe that that was orchestrated by the White House. And they were throwing it out to see how it went, how far they could go in criticizing us because we have stay-at-home moms and we're all wealthy. But they wanted to see how far they could go, and it backfired. And at that point, then they started retrenching. But I guarantee you've been in politics. An underling like that doesn't make a statement like that unless somebody up the ladder has approved it being made. So it's going to be nasty. It's going to be mean. The union workers will be in here and trying to intimidate. Hollywood and New York money will be coming in here. The Democrats just bought a $4.5 million TV ad criticizing us and throwing him. They just bought it today, $4.5 million in Virginia. So it's going to be, we think, somewhere between $75 and $100 million spent in Virginia this campaign. And I said, am I going to be able to watch NFL football without political ads? No. They're going to be on at halftime, the quarters, timeouts, everywhere else. So get ready. We can't beat him with money. And he's already got 50 paid workers in Virginia. So it's going to be like Ken Cuccinelli says. Ken said he's never been in a campaign where he raised more money than his opponent, and he's never lost, because the ground troops come in and they help him, and we're energized this year. The others are being paid so much an hour to come out and do something. So we've been saying, don't wait until October to get involved this time. Get involved now. I think that the future of the country depends on this election. I'm not sure what this country would look like if he's re-elected for another 4 years. And he would ignore Congress, he would ignore the courts, and they'll just do what they want to do. So look on it as being critical to the country your kids grow up in, the country your grandkids grow up in, because it is critical. That's why I got involved in the first place. I wanted my kids and grandkids to do better than I did. And with an Obama-Tim Kaine administration, that wasn't going to happen. So this is a big one, and we all need to be involved.
Thank you, Pat. This evening we have representatives or our candidates from the 7th District congressional seats. The primary is June 12th. And I'll turn the floor over to Floyd Bayne.
Good evening. I want to thank you folks for having me out here this evening. I'll give you a quick rundown of who I am, just the Reader's Digest version. My name is Floyd Bayne. I am going to be 55 years old this month, so if you're looking for suggestions for gifts, see me after the talk tonight. And I was born and raised in Richmond, went to school there, graduated from John F. Kennedy High School, and I have recently become a career changer. I went to John Tyler Community College and then to Mary Baldwin College to get my degree to teach history and political science. I'm currently student teaching, excuse me, not student teaching, I'm currently substitute teaching in Chesterfield County, and depending on how things go this summer, I'll be looking for a full-time job to teach. My wife and I have been married for over 30 years. She is a school teacher in Chesterfield, teaches in elementary school. I have a daughter, 22, and a son, 19. Right out of high school, I went into the family grocery business, and we owned as many as 3 supermarkets in Richmond at one time. And I also had my own business for a while, the private security services business, where I trained private investigators and armed and unarmed guards. So I've run a couple of businesses. I know how to do a payroll, I know how to supervise employees, and I know how to balance a checkbook. The reason I decided to run for office is I'm one of these people who likes to hold other people accountable when they tell me they're going to do something and then they don't do it. That's how do you guys feel about that? If somebody tells you they're going to do something, do you generally expect them to follow through on it and do what they say they're going to do? Most of you, I would think. How many of you think that the federal government right now has grown entirely too large? Show of hands, don't be bashful. The federal government's too big. Do you think the federal government spends too much money? Do you think part of the problem is career politicians who make it a career of being in Washington for 20 and 30 years instead of doing the right thing and being a citizen legislator? You think that might be part of the problem? Well, my representative voted for something in 2008 that just pushed me over the edge. Voted for TARP. Now, if you read the Republican creed, it says that the free enterprise system is the most productive supplier of human needs and economic justice. And yet, whenever we hear about a solution from Washington for the economy, we hear about a government solution, don't we? Whether it's Republican or Democrat, it's a government solution. It says here, free enterprise system. When is the last time we actually let the free market right itself? Can anybody ever remember that happening? I think the last time was 1920. We don't hear about the crash of 1920, we hear about the Great Depression. Do you know we did have a crash in 1920 that was gone in a few months because the government did not interfere, the government let the free market right itself. Well, when he voted for that, I thought to myself, all right, this is it. I've been watching the voting record, I've been listening to what he says, I've been watching what he does, the two aren't adding up. I went to the first Tea Party rally in Richmond. Anybody here go to that? Down at Kanawha Plaza? Well, I'd never been to anything like that before. This, you know, one of these protests with people carrying signs and chanting and whatnot. I always looked at those things as, you know, it's a bunch of hippies out there just looking for trouble, right? Well, I went to this thing for the Tea Party, and I realized I wasn't alone. There were other people who felt the way I did. And I literally went up to strangers and struck up conversations with them and said, hey, what do you think about somebody challenging this guy? Without exception, everyone I spoke to said the same thing. Yes, I wish somebody would challenge him. We need to get rhinos out of Congress. So that's when I decided I needed to do it. Well, that was back in 2009. I ran as an independent. We all know how that turned out. After that, I had a lot of people in the party contact me by email and phone and say, hey, we want you to run again. We'd like you to do it within the party. We think that's your best chance. And you should know, I've voted Republican all my life. I'm not some Johnny-come-lately to Republican politics. But, folks, we've got to start holding these guys accountable. And you don't hold people accountable by continuing to vote for the same guy over and over and over again when his record proves that he is not doing what he said he's going to do. The Republican creed again states that fiscal responsibility and budgetary restraints must be exercised at all levels of government. Then I'd like somebody to explain TARP to me. The estimates of TARP ranged from $34 billion to as high as $100 billion of taxpayer money to bail out businesses. And by the way, our illustrious representative just voted for another bill the import-export bank bill that's going to wind up doing the same thing. It's going to pick and choose winners and losers in the free market. PEPFAR, does anybody remember PEPFAR? The President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. You remember that one? $55 billion of our tax dollars to Africa so they could fight AIDS over there. Now, I think we all agree that AIDS is a bad thing. We'd like to see something done about it. But anybody in here think that that's the federal government's responsibility, using our tax dollars? Is that a constitutional bill? I don't think it is. Like I said, I've been through some college classes on the Constitution, and I don't remember finding that in there. That's $55 billion. Voted for that twice. My opponent has raised the debt ceiling at least 5 times under George Bush, starting at $5.95 trillion and ending at $9.815 trillion. And just recently, in August of last year, he voted to raise the ceiling again by another $2.1 trillion. Now, folks, I could run down a whole list. We could be here for an hour or more, me running down the list of bills that he has voted for that have increased the debt, raised the debt ceiling, grown the government, and spent money that the federal government should not be spending. Now, when a Democrat does that, what do we say? Tax and spend, they're growing the government, they're progressive, they shouldn't be doing it, it's unconstitutional. What are we going to do when one of ours does it? Are we going to keep voting for the same guy over and over again? Oh, he'll get it right next time. Well, he understands now, he finally gets it. Say what you will, I just don't have the patience for that kind of foolishness. If you're going to grow the government, just tell me who you are, tell me what you're going to do. You're going to grow the government? Fine. Tell me that. I can vote for you or not based on that. But don't tell me you're going to be fiscally conservative and responsible with the budget, and everything you do grows the government and makes it bigger. The Republican Creed further states that the federal government must preserve individual liberty by observing constitutional limitations. Now, I read that to mean that we are to adhere to the Constitution. Is that how you understand that? The Constitution, if we adhere to that document, our liberties are assured. You do understand our liberties don't come from the government, but the government does have a responsibility to protect those liberties. That's what our Constitution does. But let's go back to the Bush administration, the Military Commissions Act of 2006, which my opponent voted for, which gave ever more power to the executive branch and is very similar to the National Defense Authorization Act. Have you heard about the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act? Do you know what that does? That authorizes the federal government to arrest and detain indefinitely, with no due process, anybody they consider to be a quote-unquote potential threat. And you say Alien and Sedition Act. Now, I'll tell you what I told some folks a couple of weeks ago. I'm a candidate for office. You expect me to stand up here and say things about my opponent that are unfriendly. Don't believe me. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. See me after this meeting. I will gladly give you any one of a number of websites you can go to. VoteSmart.org, Library of Congress. There are a lot of places you can go to find these things. So you don't have to believe me. I'm not making this stuff up. I am, however, angry about it. I'm angry because I'm a citizen of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I have to live under these laws. And I'm not at all happy about it. Now you're asking, well, Floyd, what would you do different? Well, number one, I wouldn't have voted for him in the first place. You read the Constitution of the United States of America. If you have any questions at all, you've got the reference material, read it. Go to the Federalist Papers. Read the Constitution. Read the Declaration of Independence. It's not that hard to find. H.R. 347, the Federal Restricted Buildings and Grounds Improvement Act of 2011, is an assault on our First Amendment rights. Now, the Secret Service can decide whether you should be allowed to protest at any event where one of the people they're protecting is speaking. Now, all of these things I've just spoken of, let me say this, the Federal Aviation Administration Reauthorization Act also authorized the use of unmanned drones, the ones that fly around, you know, the ones we're using to launch bombs over in the Middle East. Now they can use those here in America to spy on American citizens. So your Fourth Amendment rights are gone out the window. They can just spy on you anytime they want to. Now you're probably thinking, well, Floyd, we're not terrorists. Well, we don't need to worry about this. This stuff's just aimed at getting rid of the terrorists. Anybody remember when the Department of Homeland Security came out with their new guidelines for law enforcement in the country describing who might be a potential terrorist? If you're in the Tea Party, you're a potential terrorist. If you're a returning American war veteran, you are a potential terrorist. If you're someone who has spoken about the need to adhere to the Constitution, or for limited government, or if you're a Second Amendment advocate and you own guns, you are a potential terrorist. My opponent voted for this stuff. I do not think that is adhering to the principles of the Republican creed. Peace is best preserved through a strong national defense, part of the Republican creed. Do you know we're more concerned with the border between North and South Korea than we are with our own southern border? We've got troops stationed in Korea to protect that border. We won't even put troops on our own border to protect the United States of America, and that's the federal government's primary responsibility. I don't know. Am I wrong? Should we be more concerned about the United States of America than we are North and South Korea? So these are things, folks, that I have looked at over the years, and it just came to a head. And I thought, well, you know, we've got to start, if we do nothing else right now, the first thing we have to do is stop spending money. We have got to stop doing it. My opponent, and again, I challenge you, if you can find it, please email it to me. I would love to see it. Find one bill he has voted for that has done anything to reduce the size and the scope of the federal government. Anything. I'd love to see it. I haven't been able to find it. None of the people that have been doing research for me have been able to find it. So if you can find it, I'd love to see it. Well, Floyd, what would you do? How would you cut spending? What would you do to reduce the size of the federal government? Well, let's start with the Constitution. Great place to start. I would abolish any department, bureau, branch, or legislative bureaucracy that is not constitutional. Personal Income Tax Division of the IRS. Get rid of it. Department of Education. Get rid of it. Department of Energy. Get rid of it. FEMA. Abolish it. Folks, I've got 11 pages here. 11 pages of bureaus, departments, bureaucracies created by the federal government that have done nothing but increase our tax burden, grow the federal government, get it into every little aspect of our life. You know, they tell you what kind of toilet you have to buy now, what kind of light bulbs you have to use now. It's because of stuff like this. And what I'm saying to you is, my opponent has done nothing to reduce this burden. He talks a lot about it. It's an election year. You're going to hear a lot of wonderful things about what he's going to do. He had 8 years under Bush when we had both houses and we had a Republican president. What did we do to reduce the size of the federal government? We want to beat the Democrats up all the time when they grow the government, but are we going to give our guys a pass when they do it, or are we going to hold them accountable? I was talking to somebody a few minutes ago about it. We got to hold their feet to the fire. Am I right?
Yeah.
Hold their feet to the fire. Well, how do you do that? Do you do that by saying, all right, I'm going to give you one more chance. I know you've already had 12, but I'm going to give you one more. Or do you say to them, you know what? You've had your chance. You blew it. Now it's time to move on and we'll try something else. I don't want to be a career politician. I'll tell you right now, if you got a tape recorder, I'll give you time to turn it on. I want you to remember this. If I'm elected and I'm fortunate enough to serve the 7th District, I will not serve more than 3 terms. That's 6 years. You don't have to have term limits for me. I'm going to term limit myself. I don't want to be a career politician. I've got other things I'd rather be doing with my life. I'm doing this because nobody else in the party is stepping up. Nobody is doing the things that they say they're going to do. The ones that do are labeled as crazy. They're the ones who are marginalized and talked bad about. Folks, we need to rein in the federal government. It's too big. It spends too much money. And I don't care which party is doing the growing, it's wrong. And we need to stop it. And I intend to hold my current representative responsible by challenging him. I'm hoping that you agree with some of the stuff I've said, enough so that you'll support my campaign. You'll go out and spread the word, tell your friends and neighbors, send them to my website. I think Tammy passed out some of my cards a minute ago. You've got my contact information. If you have a question, I'll tell you this. I am never going to give you a song and dance routine. You ask me a question, I'm going to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer. I'll look into that. But any answer I try to find that relates to the federal government is going to be based on the Constitution. Is that a proper function of the Constitution of the federal government? The government has 17 enumerated responsibilities. That's it. Anything beyond those enumerated powers are left to the states and to the people. Remember that 10th Amendment thing that we've seemed to have forgotten about? That's where it belongs. The bulk of the power should be with the states and the people, not at the federal government level. That's who I am. That's what I'm about. That's what I hope to do. I hope you agree, and I hope I can count on your support. And I'm here now, so if you have any questions, I would encourage you to ask me. I'll be happy to take any.
So you're blocking the vote to raise the debt limit again. You're saying no. And then you got the Republicans mad at you, and you got all the Democrats mad at you, and you got half of your constituents mad at you, and the press is saying that you're not cooperating, you're not compromising. Because when you go to Washington, compromise is the way to go. And you're being threatened with being pulled off from committees, and so on. Still strong, stand strong, or what do you? How do you?
Do you take?
Is there any going along to get along?
I don't compromise when it comes to liberty. You either have it or you don't. How many of you in here are married? How many of you swore an oath when you were in front of that preacher at the front of the church? You swore made a promise to your wife or your husband, did you not? Are you keeping that oath? Even though things get tough sometimes, maybe you have a bad argument, maybe you're angry with each other, but you keep your promise, don't you? It's not hard to do, folks. Keeping promises can be done. I'm going to swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Not the U.S. Congress, not a party. I know that might not sit well with some people, but there it is. My oath will be to the Constitution, period. Now, I'm human. I may make mistakes. I may misinterpret something. I'll have help. I'll have people that I can count on to help me with research, looking up things, making sure I make the right decision. But ultimately, the decision is going to be based on the Constitution. That's how it should be. We were talking earlier, and I told Mickey then, folks, I'm getting called names, getting marginalized, being beat up on doesn't scare me. I've been an ice hockey referee for 15 years. You're not going to be able to call me any name I haven't already heard. Okay? And I know that any decision I make, there are going to be people who are going to be happy with it, and there are going to be people who are not going to be happy. That's life. You can't please everybody. I'm not doing this to try to please everybody. I'm not doing this to cater to anybody. I'm doing this because I have a strong belief system. I believe the Constitution says what it means and means what it says. I believe that if we adhere to that document, we will have the liberty that is our birthright as Americans. But if we keep tinkering with it and messing around the edges, and these guys grow it with their bills, and our guys grow it with our bills, and the government gets bigger and bigger. Every time the government gets bigger, we get less freedom. You do understand that. It chips away at more of our liberty. And it costs money to run the bureaucracy that is the federal government. Here in Louisa, you had an earthquake last year. And you had to get money from FEMA and from the federal government to help with rebuilding, didn't you? What if you hadn't had to go begging to Washington for that money in the first place? What if that money was here in Louisa where it belonged and hadn't been taken by the federal government so that you didn't have to go asking to get it back? Does that make more sense than having the federal government decide who gets it and who doesn't? And that's just the way I see it. If we don't give the money to Washington in the first place, we keep it here, we don't need to beg for it later. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Do you know which government bureaucracy the TSA belongs to and how to get rid of it?
That's a good question. I'm not sure which department that belongs to. Would that be Homeland Security? Yeah, I think that's probably Homeland Security. Well, and that's a good question. I would abolish the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, think about this for a minute. When that came about, we had the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, and any number of other alphabet soup organizations in Washington, D.C., whose primary function is the protection of the United States of America. But they weren't sharing information, were they? I mean, the FBI knew some things about those terrorists, and the CIA knew some things, but they weren't coordinating. So it wasn't until after the bombings that we all got together and put this information. Oh, you know what? Those guys took flying lessons and paid in cash, but they weren't learning how to land the planes. Well, how come we didn't know that? Well, because the CIA knew it, but they didn't tell us. Or the NSA knew something, they didn't tell us. So we created the Department of Homeland Security as sort of a clearinghouse where all of this information could be brought together and could be coalesced. You remember all this when it came about? Now, to my way of thinking, what should have happened is Congress should have had some hearings and held some people accountable. Well, Mr. FBI, why weren't you sharing information with the CIA? CIA, why weren't you sharing information with the NSA? Instead of creating a whole new bureaucracy which doesn't get any information. Remember the underwear bomber? How did he get on a plane if we're sharing all this information? Because we found out later, once again, some of our agencies knew about this guy, but they didn't tell the proper authorities so they could keep him off the plane. My point being is we need to hold people accountable for their jobs. Somebody should have been fired because they weren't sharing information. This isn't about egos, folks. This is about protecting the country. And if you know something that can save lives, and you're not telling somebody in another department who could do something to stop this guy, you need to go. At the very least, you need to be fired and maybe even prosecuted. But no, we created another bureaucracy which doesn't share information with anybody. So, anybody else? So I've pretty well covered it then. Well, in wrapping up, listen, let me just say, I'm not a lawyer. Don't want to be a career politician. I want to be a citizen legislator. If I'm fortunate enough to serve, when I'm out after 6 years, I hope you can look back and say, yeah, he did what he said he was going to do. The guy he didn't lie to me. He was honest with me. He said what he was going to do, and he did it. I want to see the federal government reduced in size and scope. And if we do that, we're going to reduce our tax burden. If we get back to the enumerated powers in the Constitution and nothing else at the federal level, watch and see how quickly taxes at the federal level drop. We can eliminate the income tax. We can go back to the excise and import taxes that we had back at the beginning of this nation. You don't have to tax people on their income to pay for that bureaucracy anymore, because you're not paying for $55 billion to go to Africa. You're not throwing money at Amtrak, billions at a time, that money pit. You see how that works? You get rid of the things you're spending the money on, you don't need to keep collecting that money from people. Okay, that may seem pretty simple to some people. Folks, the only difference between the economy or at the federal level and the economy in your house is the number of zeros. That's the only difference. If you're running low on money at home, you don't run up your credit cards and put yourself deeper in debt, do you? You find a way to do without some things. You don't buy that big screen TV. You don't get a new car. You turn the heat down a little bit so you're not using the heat so much in the house. You find ways to cut spending. You don't just go deeper in debt. That's my philosophy. That's what I hope to see accomplished. And you have my word that when I tell you I'm going to do something, I'm going to knock myself out trying to get it done. That's all I can promise you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Is anyone here or would like to speak on behalf of Eric Cantor? Does anyone have anything else they would like to address or?
Speaking on behalf of Brian Reeves, who just said he wished he could have been here tonight. He's got a talk at civics event in Orange County, to which I responded, what is Orange County somehow more important than Louisa? He had no answer to that, but he did say his regrets. And like that, so.
I haven't received a printout about this weekend's schedule and all that. Is there one?
I haven't received anything either.
Who's in charge?
I will look into that and find out. See if I can get
That'd be
a.
helpful.
I mean, you haven't been getting the emails from all the candidates for, like,
Oh,
Well,
God.
aside from
I
all
know
the
what that
emails,
is. I know
there's
what
no
hotel. and-
agenda for,
And I know.
I'll look into that, so
Okay.
we can drum up.
Send me one if you get.
Because I'd like to know
You don't have one either?
what the.
What's going on in the 7th District, Pat?
He's with us.
Floyd, could you find out and send us an email on that?
I'll put Tammy right on it.
Okay, yeah.
How about a motion for adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Oh, I need a second.
Okay, we're